Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and we're going to be looking at Psalm 14, a song for the fool. I need to talk a bit about the structure of the Psalms to get our background here. The book of Psalms is organized into five books. You have chapters 1 through 41. That's book 1. Book 2 is 42 through 72. Book 3, 73 through 89. Book 4, chapters 90 through 106. And then finally, from 107 to the end of the book of Psalms. So, five books. The first two are written mostly by David. In the third book, you have someone named Asaph, who's the choir director. He seems to have been the one who composed a great many of them, most of them. Most of the Psalms of Book 4 are unknown as to their authorship, although Psalm 90 is actually attributed to Moses. And then again, we have David as the author of quite a few of Book 5. Now, here's where we want to take note of. In book one, it uses, throughout those 41 chapters, it uses the term Yahweh to refer to God. Sometimes we usually translate that the Lord in all capital letters, just so we try to keep the name Yahweh holy. But that's found 278 times, as opposed to the word for God. The Hebrew word for God is Elohim. That's only used 15 times. So when they refer to God, he's referred to in book one by name. However, when we come to book two, it uses Elohim 198 times, and only 32 times do we find the name of God. So now I'm not going to talk about the usage in books 3, 4, and 5. That's not relevant to what we're looking at. I mention this, books 1 and book 2, because it has an impact when we look at Psalm 14. Psalm 14, that's found in book 1, has its counterpart, its almost exact duplicate in Psalm 53, which is found in book 2. Notice how they begin for the choir director, a Psalm of David, and in Psalm 53, for the choir director, according to Mahalat, that is some sort of musical arrangement, a maskil of David, that is like a nugget of David. But when we get into the psalm itself, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Notice, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt, have committed abominable injustice. There's no one who does good. They're identical or pretty close to identical. There's a word here and there that's a little bit different, but they're largely the same. We go a little further. Notice the Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men. In Psalm 53, it's God has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there's anyone who understands, who seeks after God. It's it's virtually identical. We do all the workers of wickedness not know, who eat up the bread of my people as they eat bread. Notice it's the same psalm until we get to and do not call upon the Lord and have not called upon God. And so the biggest difference between the two are these different references to either Yahweh in Psalm 14 or Elohim, God, in Psalm 53. Now, the big question is, why the repetition? Why did we need to have a virtually identical psalm repeated in book 2? You say, well, maybe they wanted to have that psalm, but they wanted to have it with the sort of sensibilities they were trying to avoid the overuse of the name of God to keep it holy. That is perhaps a point, but still, I think the repetition calls to something. After all, they could have always gone back and just read book 1. I don't think they threw it out. I don't think they shelved that section of the Psalms at any point. But I think perhaps it's repeated because when you see repetition in anywhere in the Bible, Old or New Testament, it is often there, it is regularly there for emphasis, which is emphasizing this psalm. This is an important psalm. Listen up, take heed. This is a message which bears repeating. Can I say it again? This is a message which bears repeating. So with that in mind, let's jump in. For the choir director, and notice the words a psalm is actually italicized. That's the translators did that because whenever you see a word italicized in the New American Standard, the King James does the same thing. That's the translators telling you they've inserted that word maybe to help you, but it's not actually in the Hebrew text. So we're just going to say of David or for David or to David. It does have David's name there. But the word, and it is a psalm, so it's not incorrect, but that word isn't actually there. So this is our superscription, very simple superscription. And now we start off, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. And what we have here at the outset, the fool is speaking of God. Uh, what does God think of the atheist? Or I think sometimes I could say, what does God think of the atheist position? The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Notice, God says, well, that's dumb. That's foolish. Here I am. Uh, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. Notice that's the fool speaking about God. But then God speaks about the fool. And notice, they are corrupt. Notice the only person that's been mentioned is the fool. They are corrupt. They have committed abominable deeds. There's no one, wait a second, did you catch that? There's no one who does good. Are we talking about no one in the realm of fools or something bigger than that? Bear with me. We continue into verse 2. The Lord has looked down from heaven, doesn't say upon the fools, upon the sons of men. That's that's everyone. Now, it's speaking generically. It's not saying men are dumb, women aren't. It's speaking generically. That's the way they did it in ancient times. Actually, in fairly modern times, that's the way they did it as well. Nothing against women folk. That's just the way they spoke. The Lord has looked down from heaven upon the sons of men to see if there are any who understand. Are there any who seek after God? Verse 3, they have all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There is no one, here it is again, who does good, not even one. And so notice the description has gotten, it's still about the fool, but suddenly it's gotten a bit bigger to talk about all of the sons of men. And so we're finding out that what is true of the fool is also true of all mankind in a general sense. You see, there's a sense in which in which we are all foolish. The question is going to be, what kind of fool are you? Now, this passage is actually quoted by the Apostle Paul in the New Testament book of Romans. He says, what then? Are we better than they? Not at all. And he's been talking in Romans about the difference between Jews and Gentiles. And he says, look, we've already charged that both Jews and Greeks, there's nobody else, it's Jews and non-Jews, are all under sin, as it is written. And then he begins this quote from our passage here in Psalm 14. There is, and notice what he's saying, there's none righteous, not even one. There's none who understands. There's none who seeks for God. All have turned aside. Together they have become useless. There's none who does good. There's not even one. Did you catch the repetition? Talk about repetition. He wants to nail this in. He continues in the following verses, beginning verse 13. Their throat is an open grave, and he's quoting, if you've been following with us through the Psalms, we saw this back in Psalm chapter 5, verse 9. It's not an exact quote, but it's close enough to recognize it, and we did recognize that this was quoted back then. Their throat is an open grave, with their tongues they keep deceiving, the poison of asps is under their lips. He goes to another quote, also from the Psalms that we've already seen, whose mouth is full of cursing and bitterness. And notice I started in verse 7, but then I put and following verses, because what follows, even though it's a direct quote from Isaiah 59 verses 7 and 8, I think Isaiah is actually quoting or maybe what's the word for it? When you I think he's paraphrasing from Psalm 10, 8 and following. Their feet are swift to shed blood, and destruction and misery are in their paths. The path of peace they have not known. And finally, he concludes with a psalm we haven't gotten to yet, Psalm 36:1. There's no fear of God before their eyes. So Paul's borrowing heavily from the Psalms to speak not just of the fool, but of Jews and Gentiles who all, in their various manners, have gone the way of the fool, have gone the way of, Paul calls it sin, and have rebelled against God. That's a foolish thing to do. Well, let's come back to Psalm 14. And where he says, "Do all the workers of wickedness not know?" Remember, this is not Not just the one who says, not just the fool, but the bigger group of fools, the all of us fools, do all the workers of wickedness not know, who eat up my people. Notice, my people aren't the foolish ones, but these are the ones who are attacking them, who are eating them up as they eat bread, and do not call upon the Lord. Notice they said there is no God, and so they don't call upon the Lord. And so we have this picture of antagonism, the antagonism of the wicked. Notice that's the in who eat up my people as bread. They're actually trying to gobble them up. Those who are just going about their own business, worshiping the Lord. There's a natural, maybe supernatural, I don't know, but there's at least a natural antagonism where when you ask the question of the existence of God, people are not, or I would say, do not remain casual about it. That is, if somebody has decided there is no God, if they're making that proclamation, it's not usually a casual proclamation, especially when confronted by those who do believe. Indeed, there are countries today, there have been countries in the past and still are today, where if you say, I'm becoming a believer in God, where you can come under heavy persecution, where it is the actual government response. Now, let me just say, there have been times where it's gone the other way and shouldn't have, where I don't think we as Christians are called to go out and persecute atheists. I think that we are called to show all people evidence. Um, but notice, there's a natural antagonism of the wicked that is pictured here, and it goes on, verse 5. There they are in great dread, for God is with the righteous generation. Notice there's not only an antagonism, but truth be told, there's a little bit of fear. And you say, wait a minute, I thought they didn't believe in God. I thought they said there is no God. How can they fear God? Let me let you in on a secret. That the atheists, and I want to include the practicing atheist, the one who's living as though there's no God, is just a bit hopeful that he's right, because down deep there's a fear that if he's wrong, he's in trouble. And so notice there's a picture of this great dread, for God is with the righteous generation, and that's the source of the antagonism. And so notice God is with the right. He continues, verse 6, you would put to shame. Now he's still speaking to, to the one who is against the righteous. You would put to shame the counsel of the afflicted. So the afflicted, the ones who are being afflicted, that's the ones that the people that are against God are against. That's why they're afflicting them. That's what we saw, taking their bread, eating them as bread. Um, but the Lord is his refuge. That is, the Lord is the refuge of the afflicted. The Lord is the refuge of his people. And what we see here is a bit of the frustrated desire of the wicked. There are countries today where it is illegal. It's first of all, it's against the government stance. The government stance has taken the position there is no God. And there are two superpowers. One that took that stance way back, and then the USSR actually fell apart. One that still takes that stance today. And I'm not trying to get political in this. I'm just stating a simple matter of fact that still takes that stance, and yet God's word has penetrated, and there are those in both countries and others as well that continue to believe. And there's a frustrated desire that we want all people to not believe, because I don't know, maybe they think that if we can get all people to agree there is no God, then maybe democracy will take effect and God will cease to exist. It doesn't work that way. It does not work that way. And so we conclude, verse 7, oh, that the salvation of Israel would come out of Zion when the Lord restores his captive people. Notice this closing prayer of faith. And the reference to a captive people, you say, wait a minute, is that, that if this is David's psalm, this is long before the Babylonian captivity. What kind of captive people are we speaking of, where Jacob will rejoice and Israel will be glad, and it's put in very sort of Jewish terms. Um, but I think it's talking about a different sort of captivity. And likewise, the New Testament talks about a different sort of captivity, how we have been set free, not just from a Babylonian captivity that happened back in Old Testament times, but that we have been set free from a captivity that binds the heart of the unbeliever. And we have been set free to know God and to be known by him. We've been set free from our sin and from that which enslaves us to worship the Lord, to know him, and to find our refuge in him.